Hi, it's Pastor Steve here in beautiful Visalia, California. This is Happy Thoughts. We are in the series on Happy Thoughts called Stuff Things or Stuff They Say About Christianity. Today's topic within that broader topic is human sexuality. The human sexuality will be probably a 3 or 4 or 5 part series. I hope that you will begin it today and stick in there until we're able to finish it. I'll be reading from a script today, which I don't usually do, but I want to be precise in what I have to say. And sometimes when I go off the cuff, I am less than precise. So forgive the glance away from the camera and know that I do think this is a message worth hearing. So again, the broad category is stuff people say about Christianity, usually negative stuff they say about Christianity, and the topic of human sexuality. So in this instance, what they say about Christianity is that Christians or biblical Christians or conservative Christians, whatever you want to call them, are hate mongers and that they hate all gay people, homophobes, etc. That's what's said. Here is my way of thinking through that. So one of the fundamentals of truth that I try to recognize is that God has always worked in my life best when I have been humble and when I've been willing to learn from my own mistakes. Another way to think of that is that I've grown more through confession and repentance, right? Recognizing the ill that I have done than I have through proclamation and winning or accomplishment. That's the attitude that I want to bring to the subject of human sexuality and what people say about biblical Christians on that subject. I know that, like me, anyone who watches this will be aware of the intense anger and hatred and rage and almost wholesale unreasonableness of people on both sides. When Christians try to talk to social justice warriors or atheists, or even when Christians try to talk to Christians, but one group of Christians is progressive and the other group is conservative or mainstream, it just flares up into horrific actions and words more quickly than can possibly be healthy. And it hurts me to have witnessed this for so long. So I will be maintaining a civil and, I hope, loving and fair-minded view of these things as I wrestle with them here on Happy Thoughts. I want to bring an attitude of intelligence, an attitude of grace, and an attitude of being a brother to whoever is in this kind of argument or this kind of difficulty, regardless of what their opinion might be. So I want to go about exploring the core issues surrounding human sexuality, and the most productive path that I know is what I've really been taught all my life in every arena of my life, and that is that if you want to get to a nuanced and intelligent understanding of difficult subjects, you need to do your research, right? You need to find out what caused the situation to be the way the situation is. And today is effectively the first chapter in a research paper on human sexuality that I had been compiling for a few years now to that end. I find that being able to look at the historicity of events that lead us to the attitudes and the actions that are taking place in this cultural war, take away some of the emotional fire from my own attitude and allow me to really concentrate, put me in a place where I have to pray a great deal and discern a way that's much more difficult than the kind of black and white path that the two sides, LGBTQ advocates and supposed scriptural advocates, right? The ways that are suggested by them, which include name calling, dismissing, dehumanizing, and acting barbarically towards each other, those are not suitable for anybody who's actually a follower of Jesus, and that's what I found to be true. So today I'm going to relate my research on history of the LGBT movement. And I actually studied more or less. I tried to study world history on how gays have been treated in different cultures in different time periods. That's an iffy proposition. It's pretty hard because a lot hasn't been written about it. I ended up having a moment that I think brought me to clarity and brought me to a much better place in these discussions and in the thought process in my study of the United States history of the treatment of gays and the LGBTQT movement. And what I'm going to share with you today then is not just it's not an overview of all of the history that I've read, but the particular parts of the story of the LGBT folks here in the United States that most impacted me and most caused me to be able to sit back and to say, okay, even if I disagree with the hateful rhetoric and the harsh attitudes and the just abysmal words and actions that I see on the progressive left, I can understand where the anger and where the vitriol comes from. I would advocate a different way to handle it, but I do understand, knowing this particular section of history, why things have built to the place they have. So what I'm going to do then is relate to you the story of World War II from the LGBTQT perspective. In World War II, the United States government had a draft. And in a draft, you don't really get to choose whether or not you're going to serve. You are drafted. There are, of course, pacifists and other exceptions, but not many of them. So a lot of young men and some women were drafted in the war effort in World War II. Anytime you throw a net around a populace as large as the United States, you're going to get a mixture of all kinds of people. And that means that in that effort, there were quite a few homosexual men that were drafted. We don't know with or against their will, but they were put into the armed services to go fight in Japan or Germany. They were closeted. Really, it's impossible to imagine anybody who wasn't. So if you were a closeted homosexual in those days and the draft board called and you got called up and had to go to training, the reason you were closeted doesn't have anything to do with necessarily with shame or anything else. It is because to be out and gay in the 1940s in the United States was effectively a harsh sentence that you put on yourself. Gay people were not hired. Gay people were run out of town. They were shot. They were hanged. They were treated just in barbaric ways, oftentimes at the behest of the church that occasionally decided to beat up the gays in sermons and in writings and to blame problems in the church or in the country or whatever, right? It was a reality where any intelligent human being who was homosexual would have kept it to themselves. These people were drafted. They were living a life where they appeared to be like everybody else, and they were guarding their secret really, really carefully. They were put into the same situation as everybody else. So some fought on the front lines, some were in the service parts of the armed forces, right? At every level of the armed forces, we had gays and straights serving. In the service records that are available that have been studied, there is no discernible difference at all in the effectiveness as soldiers or Marines or Air Corps at that time, right? No discernible difference in the service records or in their worth as armed service personnel between gay people and straight people. The war goes well for the United States. And we win, right? We're on the winning side, and that means it's time to send the boys home, all except for the troops that were left to maintain peace as they reconstructed parts of Europe. When those soldiers were sent home, a few of the things that had been in place when there was military action ongoing changed. So if you had a person in your unit and you suspected or knew that they were gay, but they were a very good soldier and they had acquitted themselves, you most likely, even if you hated gays, were not going to bring them up on charges because they would be of value to you in a life-saving way, potentially in a conflict. Well, when the conflict was over, those kinds of restraints and lots of other kind of paraphernalia that go around what happens to armed services in wartime ended. And what we saw was a barrage of petty jealousy, personal revenge of humanity coming to the fore. And suddenly the discharge board or the court martial board was overwhelmed with the number of people being brought up on charges as being gay, which was, as a consequence of being found to be gay, you would be discharged from the armed services dishonorably, and that was horrific. You couldn't get a job, right? It would stay with you for the rest of your life. At least that's how they saw it back in those days. There were so many soldiers brought up. Estimates are on the low side that between New York and San Francisco, which is where most service personnel were offloaded when they came from Japan or from overseas, there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 plus who were court-martialed or were in the court-martial process. Now, what happened was it overwhelmed the court-martialing system, and the gays were seldom charged with any offense against anybody else, and they had court martials to attend to of people who had harmed U.S. Personnel, who were spies, et cetera, and they couldn't couldn't conceivably begin to jail people for being gay because there were so many that were being outed at the end of World War II. So what they did was they developed what's called a pink discharge, or sometimes it's called a red discharge, or even a purple discharge. It's the color of your discharge paper in different areas. And what that denoted was that you had served honorably in whatever branch of the service you were in, but that you were gay. It's the same as having a dishonorable discharge. There's no practical difference. So men who went over and fought in the war came home. They were brought up on charges by other soldiers. They were found guilty of being gay, and they were given these pink discharges. Now imagine in that scenario that they live in middle America. They live in Kansas, or they live in the deep South, or really anywhere in the United States at that time, and they would go home where they should have been properly celebrated and had parades and had pats on the back and people saying, thank you for your service. But that wouldn't have been their experience. They would have gone home and they would have brought disgrace to their families. Some of them were married with children. That would have been horrific for them. They would have been divorced. They would have become pariahs in their society. They would have lost their jobs. Chances are they would never have been given a loan at a bank during the big boom of the housing build. Giving people a punishment for having served honorably in the United States Armed Services at the end of World War II was akin to thanking them for risking their lives by ruining the rest of their lives. So what you have at the end of this crazy process is you have two large groups of disenfranchised people who cannot go home, whose secret is now out, and whose lives are in absolute turmoil. They don't go home because many times they don't want to harm their family, and it certainly would have, and they don't want to harm themselves. So they congregate together in these great cities, and they begin to share their experience, right? There's a lot of them, and as they share their experience, they determine to take care of themselves, to take care of one another. And a movement is born in which gay people who had access to funds from wealth in the family, or wealth that they had built up before the war, or who had skills enough that they could possibly get a business started, they hung together. They hired each other. They took care of each other. They looked out for each other, and they became a very necessarily cohesive and almost secretive society, right? In again, large groups. And that was the seed of what we see today in the LGBTQT movement. So here's how I think about it when I read the history and when I've reflected on it. Our country was dishonorable. We were horrific. We were barbaric to a level that just shames me in our treatment of gay people. Yes, you're eligible to go, right? We're not even going to ask. You're eligible to go and die in the war, but when you come home, we're going to take everything away from you. Not only no thanks, but punishment, and you become unclean and an outsider. That's just mind-boggling that decent human beings allowed themselves to treat other human beings that way. What it developed in the gay communities was a knowledge that this is a dangerous world, right? It isn't the occasional outbreak somewhere where a gay person is discovered and tracked down, killed. That's barbaric also, but it's dangerous for all gay people because society can turn on you and take everything that you have rightfully earned and accomplished away from you, and there's no way you can fight back. That engendered a cohesiveness, a willingness to set aside real differences in politics and outlook and other things in the gay community. And generation after generation dug in and systematically worked to figure out how to set future generations free from the tyranny that the World War II vets had experienced. And what we see today is the end product, not an end product, right? But the iteration, the modern iteration of that process. LGBTQ folks are heavily influential in every aspect of life. They have money, they have political power, right? They have control a lot of the universities and schools, and their message of equality and treatment of homosexuals as people of worth and dignity, etc. It's everywhere, and in truth, it's understandable. Anybody who, in circumstances that were the same or similar for their personal lives, that was treated that way, if you survived the ordeal, you would be determined to save others from having to go through it. That, in this history, is admirable to me. That they decided, well, we're going to use the system that exists in our country, right? Really, the only country that this could happen in those circumstances, where their freedom and the right to vote, in spite of the fact that they were gay, right, gave them the opportunity to leverage power, and they've done that exceptionally well. Who could blame them? Who could blame them, knowing what happens when they don't advocate? Now, as we discuss this going forward, right, in these terms and in other terms, what we're going to have to wrestle with is what I think is a fundamental difficulty in the process that I've just outlined for you. If in reaction to being hated and hunted and treated abysmally, you make the fundamental decision that as soon as you get power, you're going to be even worse than those who have persecuted you. Have you done a godly thing? Have you done a good thing? Have you done a noble thing? Well, there's always the case that I've made today. Yeah, in that you're trying to save other innocents from being treated the same way. But there's also a necessary moral warrant that says no, right? It's just absolutely not true that being a greater monster than the monster that harmed you is any kind of long-term solution. The pendulum of influence and power sways back and forth. We see now amongst conservatives a conservative and concentrated effort to take back the power that they feel they've lost to the LGBT and cultural warrior folks. If they gain that power in the gay community, people who are as egregious, as vile, as hateful, and as cruel as the folks who created the LGBTQ movement by being those same things, they're gonna unleash hell against their own people again in time. So let's stop there for today. Two wrongs don't make a right. It is abysmal that our country has treated gay people the way they have. And at the forefront of that is the knowledge that in World War II, 1940s, 50s, and into the mid-60s, the United States considered itself to be a Christian nation. And much of the vitriol and the hateful things that happened to homosexual and gay people were perpetrated, supported, and called for by the church. And the church should never be in the business of hunting down people that it doesn't like or that it disagrees with. They should never. It's just not what Christ called us to do, but they did. We have to live with that guilt. And when you hear angry rhetoric, or someone calls you a homophobe, or someone says whatever about you or dismisses you or acts like you don't understand at all, chances are the truth is we don't understand. We don't understand what it's like to be raised from the first moment that we understand that we're gay, right? To understand it's a dangerous, cruel world, and you could die or you could lose everything you've ever worked for if the pendulum swings the other way. It's a tough thing, and it's given rise to a circumstance that's uncomfortable for everybody, in which those who have been so long downtrodden are now fixing, right, to do the same that has been done to them. And there's the crux of the problem. Grace has not been applied at any point in this whole process. So we'll talk next week about the biblical Christian or conservative Christian, or whatever you want to call their viewpoint, and what's going on in the organized church, as much as I can understand. and try to unpack that a little bit. But first things first, today is a day for me to remember that I repent of the actions and the words and the thoughts of those who have gone before me as members of the clergy in the institutionalized church in the United States. I repent and I am heartily sorry for what has happened to people who did nothing more or less than serve their country honorably. And even after World War II, in every other age, who did nothing more or less than have a sexuality that wasn't the norm, the way they've been treated, the way they've been talked about, the way that Christians have allowed themselves to enter into those things is just a black mark in our history and something that needs to be apologized for and repented of. Next week, we'll continue the conversation. Now you get the vein of it. I hope you'll stick with it, even if, as I've made these remarks, you think, yeah, but you're not even saying about this and this and this. Yeah, there's two sides to every story, isn't there? But it's important first, before you present your side, but before you try to counter anything, that you hear clearly what the other side has to say. And what they have to say resonates deeply with me. It was unfair. It was horrible. It was terrible and scary. And we don't ever want to go back to that condition. I can't blame them. And as far as that goes in my life, I really want to be able to help make sure that we never return to that same condition, because I love the church and I love conservative people, and I don't want them to have to ever on Judgment Day come up against their own barbarity in the way that they've acted and reacted. Okay, that's happy thoughts for this week. Not so happy, but I hope informative. I hope it causes you to think. I hope it burdens you a little bit. And I'll join you again next week, and we'll continue to chat about human sexuality. What a topic that is today. I hope that you have a blessed week and that you'll be a blessing to somebody else.